Hey guys, this is Lewis. I'm here with Peter Smith, marketing and salesman extraordinaire, as and a mentor and a friend. And I'm very excited to have him here and have some of his time. So I really appreciate it, Peter. I appreciate having you today.
Thanks, Lewis. Really good to be here, and thank you for the lovely greeting.
Absolutely. So, Peter, could you talk about a little bit about who you are and a little of your story?
Sure. I'm the president of a company called Memoire here in the jewelry industry. I've been in that space for this stage more than 35 years. Worked for companies such as Hearts on Fire and Tiffanys and whatnot. I'm also an author of two books. One that I think you've mentioned, Sell Something, which is the most recent book, although it's a couple of years old at this stage. And then previous to that, Hiring Squirrels, which is about hiring salespeople. And I'm a columnist also for two magazines, for National Jeweler online, where I write usually a monthly column on the retail space. That's everything from branding to hiring salespeople and so on and so forth. And also the jewelry book, which is a print vehicle. So that's me.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about Sell Something. I've been reading it, and I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
The first thing I wanted to talk about, because you definitely confronted in the book in the beginning, is what is the relationship between the new digital landscape and the retail brick and mortar? What does that current landscape look like?
Well, I think you're talking about generally in sales, right? Not specific to the retail, to the jewelry business, but just in general.
I guess for retail, then we can hone in on jewelry specifically, because I feel like it's a little different.
In some respects, I guess that was the point I was going to make, that it's to understand what's going on in jewelry per se, you need to look more broadly to what's happening in bricks and mortar and to digital. And what I find really interesting is the evolution and the pretty significant movement of what I'll call digital natives. Everybody from Amazon to Blue Nile to Warby Parker and so on and so forth, who started out as digital, seem to have that as their path. In some cases, such as companies like Untuck, for instance, the shirt company, were quite vocal in saying, we're not going into the bricks and mortar space, and now they're all in the bricks and mortar space. And a lot of those folks are not coming in with a couple of stores; they're coming in with 100 stores. So in a very significant way. And then if you look at Amazon themselves, who are obviously a huge player online. I'm not sure what the exact number is today, but probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% of all sales online. If you look at their movement into bricks, whether it was the bookstores, whether it was buying Kohl's, or not buying Kohl's, buying Whole Foods, the relationship they have with Kohl's, which seems to be working for both organizations, relationship they have even with Sears Automotive, which will probably ultimately spin off and become its own very viable business. What you're seeing from those digital natives is a huge vote of confidence in bricks and mortar for the future. Now, having said that, those folks have a distinct advantage to the extent that they're already expert on the digital side, right?
Yeah.
And so going from digital to bricks and mortar, on some respects, it's easier in creating that sort of seamless, what is almost passé now term omni-channel. But it's a little bit more challenging for people going, the other direction, going from bricks and trying to become relevant, in the digital space. So I think and we're seeing it now. I see it with my own kids who are, 4 of them are a little bit older and they drive themselves and shop themselves, and they don't understand the difference between bricks and mortar and digital. There's just shopping. For them, it's just shopping. And sometimes that means going to a store, and sometimes that means jumping online and buying. So this sort of seamlessness for me is huge. And again, if I was a bricks and mortar retailer now, I would take great comfort in seeing what's happening with these digital folks coming into bricks and mortar, because it's saying ultimately this is about a consumer experience that means touching people and being engaged with people and talking to people in a face-to-face way, and that's just not something you can get online.
Now, and to that point, also, Peter, like, I love that in the book, you, because some people would say, well, that's because they're not creating a great experience for people online, or like you can't get a great experience. But then also in the book, you also kind of talk about how retail sellers need to kind of get real, because a lot of the times Amazon outperforms customer satisfaction according to a certain index. I forgot what you cited.
Yeah,
but I thought that was really interesting and almost like a shock to, or should be a shock to retailers. Of you know what I mean? Like
sure, because I think that's been the since the internet, if you will, became a thing, and obviously a very emerging thing. That was the pushback that bricks and mortars retailers said, look, this is not going to work because you're never going to be able to give the same experience to people online. I think what we've seen in the evolution of retail, again, more broadly, is that part of that experience in and of itself has changed. And so when I think about, even as recently as 10 years ago, there was this notion that if I kept a customer in my store a long time, that was necessarily a good thing, right? That the longer they stayed in my store, the more likely I was to be able to sell them. And I think what we think today, or how we feel today, is expediency of experience. And so part of that experience, really twofold, and Amazon has done a brilliant job in both of them. In the first instance, it's curated assortments, it's curated collection. So, for instance, if I go onto Amazon to buy books, while they might have 4 million books, they show me 4 or 5, right? Their algorithms are able to say, here's the kind of subject matter this guy or this gal likes. Let's put up 4 or 5 that we think are pretty good options. And I can still go in and put the name of a book, and I can still browse to my heart's content, but that's because I choose to do it. What they make easy for me is the idea that here's a curated collection that's designed for your taste. So that's number one, and I think bricks and mortar retailers have struggled with that for years, and especially in the jewelry space, where we think more is better, and more is not better. In fact, less is better. Less is infinitely more, and that's that whole sort of paradox of choice thing. I think the other thing that we have been conditioned to, and it'll be interesting to see what it looks like 20 years from now, is the expediency of the transactions and the experience. We have been conditioned by Amazon, and by our online experiences to be able to get what we need, get it quick, and get on with the rest of our lives. And in some cases, that may just be I want to sit there on Twitter for another 2 hours, but that's my choice if you choose to do that. What we don't have any tolerance for anymore is inefficiency. And so when we walk into bricks and mortar retail stores, if we have to stand in a line with 2 people ahead of us, even in a 7-Eleven, there's 2 people ahead of us. We take it personally. It's like, what the heck's going on here? I expect to be able to get in and get out. And I'm not a millennial or a Gen Z, clearly. But even when I go into a grocery store, the first thing I'm looking for is where's the self-checkout line, because I want to get out of here fast. Right? Right. So I think a lot of that has been a result, I suspect, of the online experience, where it's one click and I buy. I jump on Amazon, I want to buy a new cord for my Bose speaker or whatever. Boom, click, it's done. And we, in some respects, it's becoming more and more unrealistic to expect me to be conditioned differently when I walk into 7-Eleven or any retail store. I want that same click, buy, out the door.
And what do you say to what do you say to the retail, like we'll say jewelry retail sales a business owner who looks at it as more of like a frightening thing, and this is usually it's like older jewelry retail business owners who don't embrace that online, or who don't even update their website, or who refuse to actually embrace the new online changes. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say the future is bleak, is what I would say to them. Phil Waba, who I think is the chief writer for either Fortune or Forbes, I want to say Fortune, writes about retail. And he had a tweet a couple of years ago that I grabbed, and I use it when I give, talks publicly. And it was somewhere along the lines of, retail is not dead, shitty retail is dead. And I think if you've got his point was this whole notion of the apocalypse, right? The retail apocalypse is kind of nonsensical. In fact, it's very nonsensical. What we're actually seeing is retail as we know it, and that's really in the last 20 years, let's say, because there have been evolutions in the past. You had the emergence of service merchandise and Spiegels and these catalog showrooms. You had the emergence in the early 60s with people like Kohl's and Montgomery Ward's and Target and Kmart all coming into fore. So this is not new. So as we shed this latest skin, what that demands now is it demands that there be that seamlessness between online and bricks and mortar experience. And if you're having difficulty, with that idea, you're not really going to be viable or particularly interesting to younger shoppers. And you're necessarily narrowing your target customers to a demographic that is just not going to be able to sustain your business.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. What would you say? What are the most common pitfalls that jewelry retail owners make in the online space?
It's a great question. I tend to focus a little bit more on the bricks and mortar space, but I think if you bring over, a couple of things. Number one, I suppose, and you and I have had some experience with this in a previous life for me. If you're not keeping your website up to date, if you're not keeping your digital communication up to date, whatever that may be, from Facebook to Instagram to Pinterest, etc., with really good, sharp, quality images, and the ability for people to buy, and the ability for people to engage very, very quickly, you're just not relevant. So I think that's one part of it, and I'm not sure I'm hugely qualified to speak on the nuances of social media. I try to stay fairly current on it, but there's people who are obviously much better able to speak to that, like yourself. But I think in terms of bringing the challenges of the brick and mortar store into the digital space is probably as much a danger as anything else that I've seen, and that is believing that the more I show, the better it is for the customer. And I couldn't disagree any more strongly. That I think having a really curated line and having a really clear and really immediate sense when that customer or potential customer, comes onto your website, that this is who we are, this is what we're about. And if there's lack of clarity on that, sometimes it's just that split second is all it takes, and that person says, I'm off someplace else because I don't have the time to figure out what you're about.
Yeah.
So this idea that I'm going to show them everything, it just doesn't make sense. Right?
Right.
I'll give you a quick example, and it's from a bricks and mortar, from a digital native.
Yeah.
But my son, who was then 17 years of age, he's 18 now, and heading off to college this weekend as it happens. But I took him into Warby Parker a little over a year ago to go get a couple of pairs of glasses adjusted. And Warby Parker, of course, is digital native, right? And his comment when he walked in the door was, "Oh, this is just like the Apple of glasses." In other words, he knew immediately when he walked into that space what they were about. And I think that if we put that filter, that caveat onto our websites or our Facebook pages or whatever the digital communication vehicle happens to be, we'd be better off for it. Because the idea that just continuing to put stuff up there, even if those images are great images, and even if we can engage quickly, readily, and make it easy for people to buy, etc., but the more we put up there, the less relevant we're going to be.
Absolutely. And it's like that seamlessness, right? I mean, that's kind of what almost like all digital natives are so much better at. And like, when I went to Amazon, and then there's an Amazon bookstore in the Domain in Austin, and it's like, why would they have a bookstore if you would just want to go to Amazon? But I mean, it speaks to what you said in Sell Something. It's like a seamless customer experience because they could literally just get on their phone and just order it. But in a way, like the Amazon bookstore still provided such an amazing experience, and the expediency is obviously even faster because you could literally just go get the book. And it's even faster, but it's also an experience. And so it's pretty crazy because I feel like a lot of older retail business owners, I say older in the sense of like they're not willing to change, or they're scared of that change, that they're scared of that of like online taking over, and that's all that there's going to be. And like you said in the book, that's just not true. It's just a different style, and it's just seamlessness. So,
and if I could just weigh in, like
sure.
Amazon bookstore is a great example, right? Because it came from online to bricks and mortar. The irony that they were probably responsible for putting so many bookstores out of business is borderline humorous if you weren't one of those bookstores. But what you did not give, first of all, the fact that they have bookstores underscores the idea that they know human beings need to get out and engage. We don't want to sit looking at our computers all day or every day. We don't want to sit necessarily just looking at our phones or doing all of our shopping online. We want to get into a space. We want to smell the smells. We want to be moved by great music that's playing in stores. But if you look at that Amazon situation again, you didn't have to wait in line when you go by in there for an age. It's a very, very seamless experience. You do get, as I believe, you get rewarded if you're a Prime member, so you get your benefits as a Prime member when you go in there, and also. As I recall, because it's been a while since I've been in the Amazon bookstores, they bring the online reviews into the bricks and mortar space. So all of the learnings from the speed and the efficiency and, what are my peers saying? Well, my peers are saying this is a 5-star book, or my peers are saying this is a 2-star book, or whatever it might be. All of that stuff is a great example of the two being seamless.
Absolutely. That's what bored me the most. And so, like, switching over to a bit of a different subject, kind of in Sell Something that you talk about, but also something I kind of wanted to ask you, like, what are the crucial elements of a great salesperson?
How much time do you have?
I know, right?
Well, I think that in some respects, you have to go back to the book before Sell Something to really understand that. And though, I certainly do touch on it I've just gone into the dark here, so give me 1 second, I'll get some light back.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry about that. If I don't move here for a bit, I have no light. I'm thrown into darkness. So in the book prior to Sell Something, the book Hiring Squirrels, I talked about the reality of about in our industry, in the jewelry industry, in bricks and mortar, and you know, as I sort of read up on sales more broadly, not just in retail, but certainly not just in retail. It's generally accepted by, you know, far smarter people than me that a minimum of 50% of all people who work in sales ought not to be working in sales. And what that really means, and in my own research, you know, done over a 5-year period across 700 salespeople, was 58% of all of the people we tested ought not to be in any job that has anything to do with selling. Now, they're very, very good people in many cases. In many cases, they're very experienced, right? In some cases, a decade or more worth of experience. Wow. In many cases, a pedigree. They've taken courses and they understand product and so on and so forth. But what they don't fundamentally do is respond to the most important things in sales, which is influencing and persuading and inspiring customers to make a purchase, right? Because, you know, they tend to show product well, be very friendly, be very nice, show up on time, do all that stuff. But when it comes to actually influencing consumer behavior in a positive way by getting them to tap into what their motivations are, they tend not to even acknowledge that that's part of their job, right? They think part of their job is to sort of staff the store, make sure the lights are on, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So in that book, I talked about the 3 absolute essential qualities and characteristics of great salespeople. And there are more than this, for sure. There's things that I don't put down as absolutely sort of foundational. But the 3 that you simply cannot be great in sales without, and which I regret to say are inherent, right? So you can't, these particular things, if you don't have them, you're likely never going to have them. You can mitigate and work around it to a certain extent, but it's how you wake up in the morning. And for anybody who has, let's say, more than one kid, and if we come from the same parents, you know, I challenge you to think about yourself and Brandon, or, you know, me and my brother, my kids, etc. It is incredible to think that siblings who come from the same parents, who were, in many cases, went to the same schools, had the same sort of religious experiences and exposures and the same food and all this, but they're so different. From their inherent wiring, they are so very, very different. And you think, how's that even possible? And so, you know, a quick anecdote to support this. I was giving a talk a few years ago in Palm Desert. I'm not sure if I put this in to sell something or not, but, you know, I had about 100 people in the room, and I wanted to make the point about inherent wiring, right? Intrinsic wiring as a precursor for success in sales. And so I asked the group, I said, would you stand up if you have at least 2 or more kids in your family by the same biological parents, right? Because that really makes the point about intrinsic. And about 60 people stood up in the room to say, I have at least 2 or more kids, you know, by the same mother and father. And I said, would you now stay standing if you would describe reasonably those 2 kids as more or less having the same personality, more or less having the same wiring? And all but one guy sat down, right? Everybody sat back down to say, hey, I got 2 kids or 3 kids or 4 kids, whatever it was. And they do not have the same wiring. They're completely different kids. And I'm sure thinking about your own brother, and I'm thinking about my family and my kids. And it's just true that we are born with very, very different wiring. And so the traits that are hugely necessary, and I would argue in the absence of, you simply will not be very effective in sales, are number 1, drive, right? This idea that you have to be inherently driven. You inherently driven to accomplish, to influence, to be competitive, etc. You have to have drive, because for all the training resources you might throw at somebody, if they wake up in the morning and they're not driven, And we're all driven, some of us are driven to do different things, but you're simply not competitive, not driven. You're not going to be good in sales. It's as simple as that. If you don't have that trait, I don't believe you have a chance to be successful in sales. Mm-hmm. The second one, and I'm listing these, as three, but not in any order of priority, because I think any one being absent and you're going to have some challenges. The second one is empathy, right? And that is, I have to have, the inherent sort of desire to want to listen to somebody, to want to listen not just to their words, but what are they not saying? Am I interested enough in them to absorb their body language, to sort of see if there's an inherent conflict between what they're saying and what their body language is telling me, i.e. I'm talking to a customer and he says, yeah, that's great. And then I notice that, one of the feet is sort of pointing away, which says he's looking to get out of here as quickly as he can. Or you're showing him something in the case and he says, yeah, I really, really love that. And what you're showing him, he's already, he's moved on and he's looking at something else. So empathy, understanding and giving a hoot about what that person feels and thinks and cares about and is motivated to do, you have to have that. And I think somebody might say to you, hey, listen, your listening skills are not particularly good, so I'm going to send you for a weekend with Tony Robbins or some other great motivator who's going to talk to you about how to be a great listener. I would argue you're going to come back and for a day or two you'll be good, and then you'll revert right back to who you were. So you simply cannot be good in sales if you're not willing to listen. You get otherwise what I think was Mark Twain who said, if you don't have empathy, you believe yourself to be a hammer and everything looks like a nail, right? And then you're going to beat people into submission. And then the third thing, so you drive, you get empathy, and then the third is resilience. If when we are rejected, and I talk about this in Sell Something, the effect on our brain is similar to if we were physically accosted, right? And so what happens when I hear no, if I don't have resilience, it's a devastating thing to me. And so if you think about the math of sales, again, whether you're in outside sales or whether you're in retail sales or whatever, whether you're in sales where there's a longer horizon or whether it's a more immediate like retail where it's more often than not the here and now, you have to be okay with rejection. It doesn't mean you like it. It doesn't mean you don't learn from it. I mean, some of the best salespeople I know, when they're not successful, they sit down and analyze everything that was said, everything that happened. What might I have done differently? How did that happen? What they don't do is beat themselves up, saying it was all me, it was my fault. In other words, they have resilience. They understand I'm not going to win every one, but I'm going to get as enthusiastically into the next one as I possibly can. So resilience is absolutely huge. There's a great story at the beginning of Hiring Squirrels, about somebody who I had an experience with, and I won't tell the story now, from a timing standpoint, but it was a powerful awakening for me that once I realized this person had very low resilience, I understood completely why some years earlier we had to let him go from a company I was working with, because if you can't hear no, if you're not wired to hear no, the best way to protect yourself neurologically is to not put yourself in a situation where somebody can reject you. And so that what you do there is, I'll be really friendly with customers. I'll be very customer oriented and very, easy to deal with, but I won't ask for the sale, because if I ask for the sale, I might hear no. And the more no's I hear, the more I take that personally and the tougher it is, on me. So drive and empathy and resilience, those are the absolute givens, and those are really not teachable. You can teach somebody to be cognizant of them if there's a shortcoming there, but it's a little bit like, Lou Holt said about motivation. He said, I know how to handle a motivation issue. You cut him. He didn't say you sit him down, you motivate him, you pick him up, you incent him, you cut him. Because if somebody's not motivated, which is the whole drive aspect of it, they're going to struggle to be successful in sales.
Yeah. So So drive, empathy, and resilience.
Yeah. 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 I mean, there's other things you want and you'd like to have. You know, you want people to have a sense of urgency so that we're getting what we can get today, and everything is not being put off. If somebody is prone to sort of procrastinate, it's not a great, characteristic for sales. You'd like somebody to have a good risk tolerance if they're in sales, as opposed to my pilot flying the plane. I don't want him to have a lot of risk tolerance.
Right.
But you can work around a lot of that stuff. You can teach product. You can teach cultural norms. You can teach approach and policies and practices and so on. You can't teach drive, empathy, or resilience. You either have it or you don't have it.
So talking about that, like using with that understanding of the sales key components, because you also talk about in closing of the sale, using humor at some point, or using humor throughout the sales process. So I thought it would be kind of funny to ask, when was the time when you used humor to close a deal? Do you remember, like, the last time you used humor?
No, I don't. That's like saying to somebody, hey, be funny now. 1, 2, 3, go.
No. I mean, just an example or something.
Yeah, I think that. I think that humor is sort of a conduit to human connection, right? And so when we're engaged with people, whether it's in a professional setting or whether it's in a private situation, humor is a wonderful way to connect, and it also relaxes people. I mean, if you think about just simply the art of smiling, the act of smiling. And I'm talking about real, authentic smiles, just as I'm sure you're talking about real, authentic humor. It has a way physiologically of relaxing us and making us feel probably like singing and some of the other great art forms of connecting people in a very non-threatening way. The danger, of course, when you talk about humor is somebody thinks they have to go and learn a bunch of jokes and tell jokes.
Yeah.
It sounds so contrived, and it just isn't that funny. And so, I think that rather in the close, I'm not sure that there's a bigger role for it in close than there is any place else. But I think if you can relax, your customers and or your prospects, not with joke telling, but just a humorous observation here and there, it's as likely to be successful in professional setting as it is if you're sitting next to somebody on an airplane or sitting next to somebody in a bar. Once you share a fun observation, it's a great human sort of connector, a great bond.
Absolutely. So,
but I promise the next time I'll look up some jokes. No, I'll tell you some jokes.
No, I know what you mean, though. I know what you mean, because definitely sometimes it's like during the during close, it's like if you can just kind of being like, okay, let's not take it so seriously. Let's kind of relax a little bit, because sometimes during the numbers, you can sometimes get a little tense. You can get a little can get tense, they can get tense, and then they're all just like, guys, come on, let's just, what we're here to do, but let's also have a great time. We don't have to be so tense about everything, and.
Well, I do think also that you're correct in all of that. But if we have made that human connection, and especially so if it's been helped by humor, you still have to listen. You still have to ask good open-ended questions. Mm-hmm. It's easier when you get to that sort of stage. Hey Joe, let's get this done. We're not getting any younger. You can have that.
Exactly.
But if that's the first time they're hearing a little humor out of you, and you've had this, as you described, this sort of tense standoff, or you've had this real sort of disconnect, that's going to fall, flat on its face. Sure. If it's been going well, I think then you've sort of earned the right to use that, in your close or your own version of it.
So talking about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, absolutely. It's like you have to kind of do everything right from the beginning to so that you earn that right to actually have the humor. But and talking about the experience in the retail space, what are some of the key components of customer experience in the retail space, in jewelry stores?
There's so many. Yeah, there's so many. I think in some respects you've got to silo the various components, right, and then look at each of those sort of as an independent entity coming together to create a really dynamic whole. And the three examples I would probably use would be the space, the physical space, number one, the product story, right, product brands, etc., and then people, right. Those I would sort of talk about as sort of three of the central ones. There are others, of course. And then the space, for me, that means, a warm space, an inviting space, an interesting space, not cluttered to where you're afraid to turn around, that you're knocking stuff over, with, really interesting lighting, ideally contrast lighting, which if I sit here long enough, my light will go off. That's contrast lighting. But, so it's not, so I think having the right lighting matters a lot. Having, the ability to sort of breathe and move in the space matters a lot. Having an identity, for the space itself to have an actual personality. Do you feel a little bit like a modern Guggenheim sort of building in terms of interior, or does it feel more like a library in a stately home? There's a million different ways you can do it, but the actual physical space itself ought to have some personality. You ought to be able to say, I get what this is about. The lighting, the music in that space. For me, I just can't talk enough about getting the music right, and that means having music in there so that it's tapping into that sort of emotional aspect that is so important to us, with music, and having the music at a volume that allows us to both enjoy it and to the extent that I can hear the lyrics that are being sung, and also have a conversation without having to raise your voice because the music is so loud. And I would say, by the way, the converse of that is, if the music is so low that it's not contributing, why do you even have it? It's almost irritating to me when somebody has music that's so low or of such bad quality sound system that it becomes an irritant. So I think having the music, having the lighting, having the physical space, having the scent, right? You go into the Westin hotels, I talked about this a lot, and they have their own scent. I'm not sure what it's called, like white pine or whatever it is, and it's a couple of $100 on Amazon. And for a space not to have their own scent, it makes no sense at all. So that's the space, and there's so much that you can do there. Like the use of mirrors is another great deal where, you can make some interesting stuff happen. But generally, on the space, keeping it non-cluttered. Right?
Yeah. Well, and to interject a little bit, I wanted to, because I'm just kind of playing a little devil's advocate, because we're talking about cleanliness and orderliness, not just outside, but also in the back too, right? With the shop, with the restroom, with even your desk, with other employees as well, because I feel like some people will be like, and like some business owners may kind of look over those details because they feel like it may be a little nonsensical, or people who don't really care about that. Like you said, you're talking about the music and being very specific with the music and just the scent. And I feel like many of them would be like, those are silly details and like cleanliness in the back doesn't matter. It just cleanliness here matters. No,
I think it matters a lot, and I think the devil is in the details. And I think if I had a pilot greet me on a flight when I was boarding and said, "Look, we're going to overlook some of the details today, but I'm fairly confident we're going to get you there," I'm not sure that's what I would want to hear. That. When I go into retail stores, and it doesn't happen that often, certainly in the jewelry business it does a lot, just simply going to the bathroom tells you a huge amount about that business. Because not just even if it's non-accessible, I think most places you have to have, if not all now, you have to have accessible bathrooms for people. But let's say it's not. What does it say to your team, to your own employees about, here's who we are, but only out front?
Yeah.
There you go. or you're not. And so I think you're right about the shop in the back or the stock rooms or whatever else it might be. Who are you as a business? And then you should be that all the way. Not like I'm a good athlete when I'm on the field, but I'm not when I'm supposed to be training, or I'm eating crap food when I should. You're
right.
all in, or you're all out. So I think that does matter. And the other two things I talked about, so the space and all of those components. I think the product, I won't spend a lot of time because we talked about it earlier on, but having less is more. Here's a finite number of stories told exceedingly well, and getting that right, because the more I put in there, the less people see. And then the third aspect, which we just spent some time talking about, is getting the people right, because it is the difference maker in a business. And, when I talked about the jewelry business having 58% of people who really ought not to be in any sales job, we might be slightly ahead of most, but it's about 50+% across the board in sales. And that's the difference between a successful business and not. That's the difference between a business growing and a business going out of business. And so what I see, unfortunately, is people waiting too long to make the hires. They wait till they have an opening, they wait till they have a need, and now you introduce an element of desperation around that, which doesn't help the process. Instead of saying, look, let me always be prepared. Let me interview people whenever it makes sense to interview people. And so then when I do have a need, when I do get an opening, I'm proactively reaching out to those folks and not operating in a panic because I need somebody to, open the doors on Friday.
That's wonderful. And I think I feel like we only have like about 8 minutes left, right, Peter? Because I think you
whatever time you need, I'm good. So whatever you need.
Okay. I just want to be respectful of your time. So I just have a couple more questions. One I just thought of too is like, I love these quotes that you have throughout Sell Something. So like Sell Something. I love these quotes. Like, we live in the world when we love it. And I love this one. Some people die at 25 and aren't buried until 75. So my question to you, though, is, if you can remember, because I don't know, which one is your favorite? Which one is your current favorite?
I don't know that I have a current favorite. I do love both of those. And, in fact, I grabbed a copy earlier on, and I was looking at some of the things which I think you as a musician will appreciate from the very front of Sell Something, right? Where, the point I was trying to get across, there's a Hemingway, a Keith Richards, a Billy Connolly, and Tom Jones quote, right? And if you look at any of them, look at let's say the Keith Richards. I have no sense that my feet are touching the ground. I'm elevated to this other space. People say, why don't you give it up? I can't retire until I croak. I don't think they quite understand that what I get out of this, I'm not doing it just for the money or for you. I'm doing it for me. And so I think that whole sense of, it's not necessarily I sat down and I decided what I wanted to be. In some cases, it's, we need to, and it's one of the things I've said to my own kids. Wherever you end up going, make sure you love it. And I realize that's a cliche, but that doesn't mean here's a specific job, because even if you're wired to do something, you may still have a rotten boss, you may still have a bad experience, but if you generally find yourself in a space that you love, it's not for the joy it gives you on good days. It's for the joy it gives you and the ability to survive the bad days, right? Because this is what I love. And I know every day is not going to be a great day. So if I'm in this space, when I have a crap day or two or week or boss or job, it's okay, because I'll get over this. If you're in a space that you're not comfortable, and that may be, I'll give you just a couple of examples. Like, why'd you become a doctor? Because my parents wanted me to be. When you're there, you're there. That's it. I wanted to become an attorney because that's what my parents wanted for me. And all of a sudden you find that that's not what you love. You're stuck. You're in that space. And so I think that, what I tried to get across with those quotes and probably the ones you just used, I think the the Tagore quote, I think, was one of the quotes you just used about sort of we live in the world, when we love it, or we love the world we live in. I'm not sure exactly what the quote was, but that meant be present, be here, be in the now, be committed to it. And that's, I'm not saying somebody should go off and meditate all day long. That could be for you getting up on a stage with your acts and just, for me, last night I had a show with a big band, and I got to sing songs with a big band in this outdoor gazebo in this beautiful August evening.
Nice.
Be present, be in the moment.
Yeah.
And that is as apt professionally every day as it is any place else. If you're skirting on the periphery of it, making excuses about why you're there, or wanting to sort of blame somebody or something for your predicament, get over it. Pick yourself up and go change your circumstances. So, look, I'm not the Tony Robbins type. I'm not a motivational speaker. But what I am is I have a really short supply of patience for people who spend too much time bitching about their own situations. Pick your ass up and go do something about it.
That's right. I love it. And can I tell you my favorite?
Please.
Well, my favorite. Okay. My favorite is the most important thing I look for in a musician is whether he knows how to listen, by Duke Ellington.
Duke Ellington, yeah.
Which I thought was so. It's so interesting because I've played with musicians where all they want to do is for other people to hear them.
Correct.
And that also plays into your other quote too. Where he's like, only fools say something. I was trying to find it over here, but it basically, fools only, like wise men. I don't know if you can remember that quote, but it's like wise men.
Yeah.
It's. I got to be careful what I say because it's very specific. But basically, it's like, I just love how Duke is because Duke Ellington is incredible. He's one of the greatest musicians of all time, and for him to say that it's not showing off and playing or even the technical aspect, it's just being willing to listen and use your ears and not use your fingers or your ego, really. It's like, I get the ego, right?
Yeah, look, I think it's obviously, or I wouldn't have put it in, I think it's a brilliant quote. Brilliant quote. I'm a Duke Ellington fan, and I sing a lot of his songs. I'm thankful that I get to do that with my trio and a couple of the big bands I play with. But it is a brilliant metaphor for salespeople, right? And it's exactly what I was talking about earlier on when I said, if you don't have empathy, in other words, the ability, the will, and the desire, the real desire to listen, you are that guy getting up on stage and wailing away, really caught up in the ego of it. Or you're that salesperson behind the counter who's like, this is about me, and I got to tell you everything I know, and I got to beat you into submission. And sometimes it works, right? Somebody gives you a sale because they just, I just want to get out of here and be done with this. So, okay, fine, I'll take it. But it doesn't really, motivate me as a customer to come back. And it doesn't motivate me as a musician to want to play with that person again. So I think that quote is a brilliant quote. I'm glad you pointed it out, because in some respects it could be a great metaphor for salespeople. You've got to listen. You've got to have that empathy. Not because, and I'm talking, by the way, not listening just in case anybody needs any clarity on it. Not listening for the purpose of what am I going to say next, or not listening to the extent that you're just quiet while somebody else is speaking. Listening because you just have this insatiable desire to really understand what's going on with that other person. Right? That's the kind of listening we're talking about, and I think that's the kind of listening that Duke Ellington was talking about as well. Is really listen to understand all the nuances and to sort of hear the color. Right? That's such a crazy thing that I know you as a musician would get, but hear the color, hear the texture in this stuff. And it's not just sort of notes on a piece of paper. I mean, this is real, organic, living, breathing stuff, And if you're not listening, you're not going to hear that. And I think great salespeople do that. And they pick up the nuance. They pick up the subtleties. And, it's so interesting to me, and it always has been, that great salespeople are often accused by their less successful colleagues of just being awful. They push and they do this and they do that. And I understand and have written about it. You've seen it in Sell Something about baggage, right? Great salespeople bring baggage, and you've got to be able to manage it. That's different than being toxic, right? But the less successful colleagues tend to talk about, I'd never get away with that, or I wouldn't want to do that. And yet, great salespeople, they get invited to the weddings, they get invited to the important family occasions. And so, if they're so off-putting to these customers that they're selling, why are they being invited into their space in a way that's not typical of salespeople? Because they've made that human connection. Because, like Duke implores, they actually listen, right?
Yes. So, and kind of going off of that is another question I want to ask, like, how do you earn a customer's trust? Like, how I know very open-ended, and I know there's no, but what in your opinion, how do you earn a customer's trust?
Be authentic. Be authentic. I mean, a customer is no different than another human being, and I believe they can see right through, a shallow, self-serving, contrived approach. Be who you really are. Don't try to be somebody else. Just connect one human being to the next. It's what kept us safe, back in the caveman days when, not having a connection with other human beings was the difference between life and death. And to a large extent, it's the same today. It's almost a social life or death. People want to engage with people they like. And that's not about being this sort of contrived, happy, friendly salesperson, but be genuinely interested in them. It's great seeing you. Tell me why you're here, and tell me about that person. How interesting is that? When did that happen? Just a genuine connection. And by the way, if I were wrong on that, then everybody who ever went to a sales conference should be a great salesperson, right? Because you got guys far smarter than me standing up there telling you how to be a great salesperson. So all you got to do is go home and implement it. But it doesn't happen because what tends not to be spoken about is the human side of it, the neuroscience, the social sciences, that making that eye contact, right? Because when something magical happens when I make eye contact with another human being, right? Just as something really bad happens when I'm engaged with a human being and I look away, right? That has a terrible effect on that shared relationship. It actually neurologically is worse than if I were fighting with that person, right? Because when I look away, what I'm actually communicating, which happens all the time, by the way, in sales, I see it all the time. One or the other will look away, and what that really says is, I'm really not that interested in you. And to our brains, that's the equivalent of actually having a fight. It's actually worse than having a fight. Because having a fight, I'm engaged. I'm giving you all of me, right? Yeah. But when I'm engaged with you, and I'm looking off for a better option, for a more, higher profile customer or what have you, that message is communicated loud and clear in our body language. And what we do know from Morabian's study in the late 60s at UCLA is, what in terms of communication, what communicates 93% of it is not the words, right? Words account for 7% of it, and tone of voice is 38%, but physiology, in other words, our body language, physiology is 55%. That's what communicates. And so, I think that authenticity, that real human connection is just so essential in sales.
Absolutely. And what are your goals for the future? Like, you've written 2 amazing books. Do you have more books planned? Do you have like a curriculum planned, a sales curriculum plan? I know we talked about that a little bit, but what are your thoughts? What are your goals for the future? I know Memoire, of course, you're heading that, which is incredible. So what are your goals?
Well, of course, I have the columns, which are, they keep me busy enough with National Jeweler and the Jewelry Book. I have a book that I've been working on, and it's tentatively entitled, Sales 101, and then the subtext really as a placeholder is tweet-sized tips for people who don't read books. So the thought on this one is, you have 101 tips that are many of them around the kinds of things we were talking about, the need for eye contact and the dangers of breaking eye contact and so on and so forth. The idea is you would open the book on a random page and you would have a tip, and then you would try to implement it that day. Or you might have 2 tips for a day, and you might say, these are the 2 things I'm going to work on for that day. And so it's very much less is more. It's not sort of storytelling such as, hiring squirrels or sell something. It's a much simpler deal. Again, literally just a tip on one page, a small explanation on the facing page about what that means. And then the idea being, if you're not somebody who reads a lot of books or any books, because it's amazing to me how many people haven't read a book since they left school. If you get your information from Twitter or from some equivalent bite-sized vehicles, then you ought to be able to open that book, read a tweet, close the book, and say, or a tip rather, and then say that's what I'm going to put into play today. So. There's no timetable for that. It's the 101 are done. It's just a question of now affording the time and to sit down and actually finish it. And that's always the tough part because there's nothing that exciting about doing that graft work. The creative side of it is much more interesting.
Yes. Well, that's cool. I'm super excited. I will definitely get it as soon as it comes out.
Thank you.
And the other thing I want to ask real quick is. You were talking about a little bit earlier in terms of, you have no time for people that, one, complain, but also I'm assuming have that entitlement attitude, especially salespeople or retail salespeople, where they feel they're entitled to a sale or they're entitled to whatever. And I feel like some people may look at you in terms of, without knowing your story, because you talk about your story in the book a little bit, and I think a lot of people would be surprised to know of like your upbringing, because I would say you started from the bottom and you came up on on your own, and now and even more so it was Dublin, was it?
Ireland? From Ireland. Yep, I'm from Ireland. Yep.
That is so Dublin, Ireland, amazing. Yeah, and I felt like people would think, you know what I mean? Like they wouldn't, they would kind of take that for granted when they're talking to you now. Whereas in terms of like, well, you're so far above in that it's not even, and you never really came from a hard place, and you don't know what it's like or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know if you've ever encountered that before. But what are your thoughts of people that like have that entitlement and have that and in terms of like your story?
Yeah. Well, I mean, whenever I talk to people, what you're trying to get is, what are the common denominators and what are the things that connect us? And, we tend not to walk around telling our stories, right? We tell stories, but when I mean our stories, I mean getting into the real sort of deeper stuff, where you came from, your family upbringing, your education or lack thereof, as the case may be. And so I did a little bit of that and Sell Something just because I thought it'd be interesting, because we are all drawn to stories, right? I mean, books that sort of lay out, for me anyway, that just simply lay out, here's how you do it, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, are just, after a period, they just become not that interesting to us. But we're drawn to stories. Like Malcolm Gladwell is a great example, right? You look at all the books that he's written, and he tells stories, and the concepts are so much more readily transferable because of these great stories that he tells. And so we tend to do that. But, what I find when you really get to know people, whether it's people in our lives personally or people professionally, and it's a little harder professionally unless you have the luxury of maybe traveling a lot with somebody or finding yourselves in a space where you have the luxury of being able to really get to know each other. But what I find a lot with successful people is that everybody's got a story. Everybody's got some traumas, some difficulties, some things that they've had to overcome, some challenges. And so we do, almost as a default position, tend to look at other folks and go, well, that guy had it good. Or this gal, had it good. And the reality is that the vast majority of people, at least to my experience at my age, I don't meet too many. I'll give you an example. So I'm from Dublin, Ireland, right? You mentioned that a short while ago. When I grew up, we used to watch The Waltons and The Little House on the Prairie, right? Two American shows that would be on, Irish television, and we really watched them. And I used to always think, geez, that's not my family. That's not who we are. And you have a tendency to think, well, that is everybody else's family. And the reality is, it's really not. To a large extent, it's really not. That we all have our challenges, and we all, again, have these hurdles that we've had to overcome and these obstacles. And so, with me, for instance, I haven't had that question posed the way you posed it, but you'll have people who might look at your LinkedIn profile, or they look at your resume and they go, okay, you're a graduate of Boston College, and you did this thing at Harvard, and you've written a couple of books, and this, that, and the other. And they think that's who you are, right? And to a certain extent, that is who you are, but it's not who you always were. They are surprised then on those rare occasions where you can really share some things with them, that I left school at 15. And so for years and years and years, I didn't have, not only did I not have a college education, hadn't graduated high school. And, went to work, as a 15-year-old and basically being a messenger boy and making what was 15 pounds a week. And 15 pounds a week, I don't mind sharing with you, in 1977 was at that point $30, right? So that was the weekly wage for a full-time job, was $30. And so, everybody's story, obviously my story is my story, but everybody's got their own version of what they had to overcome or what they had to deal with. And in the best case scenario, we are drawn to transitional stories, to people who, took themselves from this place to that, and they're able to point to, great experiences and what have you. But the idea that any of us at a given age are the sum total of what we appear to be at that moment in time is just naive. It isn't the case. I mean, you obviously have some people who come out more privileged backgrounds, and some people who have maybe, less controversial or less challenging upbringings. But I find, on the whole, the vast majority of people I interact with, if you really get to know them, they've got an interesting story to tell, and they have to overcome some things. And in fact, I will tell you that, just look at Sell Something, the story in Sell Something about the guy who came back from Jamaica. I don't know if you recall that story about the salesperson trying to engage with that guy. And, what I talked about in that story is, so just quick recap for folks who might be listening who haven't read the book. A salesperson who's a very good salesperson trying to engage with this guy who walked into a jewelry store. She's very, very good salesperson, but had an absolutely horrendous time trying to engage with the guy. And she finally sort of, again, talking about authenticity, finally says, look, I know you come in here for a reason, and I really want to help you. So why don't you sit down and tell me what's going on? Tell me how I can help you, right? Most people, and of course what she learned then when she asked that question was one of the most powerful stories I'd ever heard. And the way she handled that whole situation, and I won't, spoil it in case anybody wants to get the book and read the book, was just so incredible to me when she shared that story with me. Now, when I think about that guy walking into stores generally, I have heard over the years in scenarios just like that, one salesperson turning to another and saying, he's just kicking tires. He's he's wasting time. That guy's not going to buy anything today. And instead, he had a traumatic experience, a hugely traumatic experience that he was wearing on his shoulders that just made it ever more difficult for him to casually connect with a stranger. And it wasn't until that stranger said, I really want to hear what you have to say. Why don't we sit down? Tell me how I can help you. And then what unfolded is just this phenomenal story, and then obviously how it ended up was just absolutely fantastic. So that's one of the best stories I've ever heard. And again, I realize it's not exactly what you were asking about, but it is in some respects connected, because this idea that we somehow know who people are without really taking the time to get to know them, or we make assumptions about, their privilege or the benefits that they had, and very often we're just wrong. That's just not the way it was. It certainly wasn't in my life, and I, would never presume to speak for anybody else and say, well, that guy's had it easy, because as you get to know people, you find that in the vast majority of cases, there's a story there.
Absolutely. So, I love that. One quick question before we sign off. I know you're from Dublin. You're from Dublin originally, and I don't know if you keep up with the UFC at all, but I've always wanted to ask, what are your thoughts of Conor McGregor? Because in my eyes, I see him as a salesman. He is a salesman in many ways. He's a marketer, but it's like he's so polarizing, which I think is also good of a salesman. But what do you think of Conor, especially coming? You see the Dublin.
I mean, it's. I would say I'm not a fan, but I like to hear that he's successful. So if I know he's got, a fight, I won't be watching it. I won't be paying the money to see it. I'm not a fan of that cage fighting, just generally. But I wish him well. In many respects, Conor McGregor is Madonna from the 1980s, or Deion Sanders from the 90s or whatever period Deion was around. In other words, they're bigger than their sport in Deion's case, or Madonna's case in the music. There's a whole sort of culture, a whole personality built up around them. Maybe Muhammad Ali might have been one of the first from a media standpoint, that they're gonna upset some people. And you're right, they are polarizing. I happen to have a higher level of sensitivity around people who are from Ireland, and especially from Dublin. And I kind of want them to behave in a dignified fashion. And so if they don't, I remember Bono from U2 in an award show one year presenting an award to Frank Sinatra. And, he used, which at that time was very, very unusual, a profanity in doing it. And he was very sort of casual about the whole thing. And I'm sure in Bono's mind, it was really sincere and really his way of saying, hey, you think I'm cool. Here's the original cool. But I remember being very offended by it. And I just thought your job was to get up there and just be dignified and be, reverential to this sort of icon. And maybe Sinatra himself did it to other people in his day, right? But it's just a personal thing for me that civility matters. It's one of the things that decency and civility do count for a lot with me. And when it's to your point, part of the brand building for some of these folks, I get it. I'm not going to judge them for it, but I'm not drawn to that.
Of course.
I'm happy when he wins, but I'm not buying the ticket.
I got you. Well, thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate your time. I mean, I think we covered a lot of amazing elements from the book, and the book Sell Something is absolutely incredible. I'm going to be putting an Amazon 5-star review shortly. So
thank you. That's
almost
great.
finished with it. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being on.
My pleasure. Thanks, Louis. Enjoyed every minute of it.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye now.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.